Good evening, and thank you to CRG for inviting me for this lecture. And I've listened to a couple of lectures in this series, and those were fascinating. So I don't know whether I'm here to disappoint you or to kind of excite you, but I'll be speaking for about 45 to 50 minutes. I have 6,000 words written. So I'll read them, and I had 15 or 16 images which I will not be showing. Another caveat: this is a new work that I'm doing right now. It's on 20th century Calcutta. Previously, I've worked mostly on 18th and 19th century Calcutta. So this is a new century, and so it's a work in progress. So be kind when you ask questions. The opening decade of the 20th century marked a new beginning for Calcutta. By now, it was the main seat of power of Britain's empire in Asia. Developed for more than 150 years, Calcutta boasted of some fine architecture, educational institutions, libraries and museums, medical college and hospitals, theatres and racecourses, elite clubs and town halls. The port of Calcutta was the departure point for worldwide circulation of commodities like tea and jute, as well as for indentured laborers to islands of the Caribbean and South America. With the Viceroy and his office wielding administrative power and various managing agencies maintaining hectic global business networks, from erecting monumental structure in memory of Empress Victoria to hosting royal couples, Calcutta was second only to London. But soon, the fate of the city started to change. The imperial city came face to face with the Indian city. In 1905, the colonial government decided to divide the province of Bengal for administrative purposes. The nationalist Bengalis, however, saw this as an attempt to create a division between the Hindus and the Muslims of the province, undermining the unity that they had achieved in opposing the British rule. Sentiments were churned, nation was invoked as the motherland, people poured out onto the streets. Processions, meetings, slogans, and speeches started to reverberate through the skies of the city. Moving out of the cloistered world of council halls, nationalist sentiment gathered steam on the streets and tea stalls of the city, in the parks and the maidans, in students' boarding houses and college canteens. Swadeshi Andolon called for boycott of British goods and advocated the use of products of Indian industries. It soon turned violent and gave rise to terrorist activities among the youths of Bengal. Suddenly, the streets and tea stalls of Calcutta, the student housings, the offices of the voluntary associations came under intense police scrutiny. Calcutta became a battleground between the colonial authority and the ordinary people. The imperial capital got a rude shock. It was not only the city of the colonial masters anymore. The natives, quote unquote, started to claim it. Against this backdrop, I argue that thinking around and about the city transformed during these early decades of the 20th century. Two distinct features can be discerned. One, the plague scare of the 1890s paving the way for more interventionist planning, culminating into the formation of the Calcutta Improvement Trust in 1912. And second, a definite challenge to the colonial rule, which also meant a definite effort by the colonial ruler to reclaim the city. And it helped that Lord Curzon was the Viceroy of India from 1899 to 1905. While making the decision to divide Bengal, he was championing the cause of Calcutta as the most significant imperial city in the East. Both these issues, planning and claiming the city, brought up questions of the past. Questions of heritage and demolition, of memory and remembrance, of monuments and statues. And not surprisingly, it was also the period when the past of the city was written about. Calcutta became a historical subject, and quote-unquote history of Calcutta was something that needed to be recorded. From the late 19th century, with the publications of census reports, gazetteers, amateur histories, systematic recording of the past got a fillip. As part of the census of 1901, Atul Krishna Roy published a short history of Calcutta. A few years later, in 1916, S.W. Goode published Municipal Calcutta, describing the infrastructural development of Calcutta from the late 18th century. On the other hand, in the same year as Roy, that is 1901, we have the publication of Kolkata Itibritto by Pran Krishna Dotto. In his introduction, Roy comments that even though he tried to reach out to various established and old native families of the city, he could not get could not get much documents from them, so he had to rely mainly on the documents of the English. Prankrishna, however, charts in detail various families, social customs, rituals, neighborhoods. Clearly, the genre was different, and Datta's account would not have passed muster with the practitioners of the emerging modern discipline of history. Two distinct modes of retracing the past of the city can thus be charted from this time onward. But in this presentation, I will not go down that path. Rather, I will focus on the efforts of the colonial government, the planners, and the amateur enthusiasts. Analyzing the early years of the Calcutta Historical Society and the workings of the Calcutta Improvement Trust, the presentation charts the simultaneous development of the idea of urban heritage and a fashioning of urban future during the high noon of imperialism. But it was definitely not only about the past. As we know very well today, the past is frequently invoked to suit the present and shape the future course of action. Writing about Calcutta's past in the early decades of the 20th century, I argue, was critical in framing the future of the city. So the first section, Bengal Past and Present, the Calcutta Historical Society and its Journal. Bengal Past and Present, I think we are all familiar with this journal. So the Bengal Past and Present, the Journal of the Calcutta Historical Society, first came out in July 1907. The society held its first meeting on 27th April of that same year. It was an effort mainly of the European community of Calcutta with token presence of some wealthy Indians. The society was keen to record the history of the city and preserve its buildings and monuments. And to disseminate that knowledge, it decided to publish a journal. In his opening statement for the society and the journal, editor Walter Firminger spelled out the task before them, and I quote, "The program of work which the society has adopted is enormous, for it will be our business not only to investigate the records of the past, but to stay the hand of Father Time as that reckless old person wipes his ruthless sponge over the slate on which we, the Calcutta men of today, are calculating the problems of our daily life. Lest they forget is to be as much our motto as lest we forget. Old houses are not to be suffered to disappear before they have been immortalized by our photographers, and a vigilant eye is to be kept over everything or over every crumbling ruin. We are not a historical society, not only a historical society, but a society which hopes to make the history of our own Calcutta of today a simpler task for the historian of the future." Unquote. This sense of history and preservation of the city gained ground among the European residents from the last quarter of the 19th century. Books like Echoes from Old Calcutta, Calcutta Old and New, or C.R. Wilson's volumes on Old Fort William charted out the broad contours of European Calcutta. Cotton's book, Calcutta Old and New, published also in 1907, mentioned that, and I quote, "Before we can summon up the ghosts of the succeeding generations, the glare of the present comes swiftly to blind us to the glamour of the past. A new Calcutta is rising in our midst. The talk is all of an Anglo-Indian houseman who is to transform the teeming Indian quarter." Unquote. On hindsight today, this sounds almost prophetic. These books document the rise and growth of colonial government of the city, its institutions, social events, and cultural practices of the Europeans. The new journal, Bengal Past and Present, treaded similar path. The society was not interested in any antiquarian discovery of the country as such. For that, the other great institution of the city, the Asiatic Society, was already in place. In fact, Firminger cautioned the researchers that, again I quote, "If our society is to achieve anything at all, we must be on our guard against vagueness in research. We must not transgress the lines which should serve to mark the boundary between ourselves and the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Calcutta becomes Calcutta for us with old job charnoks halt for good and for evil at Shutanuti. If we forget that our subject is imperial Calcutta in the making, then in fact we may, I am afraid, be lost in mere diffusiveness." This insistence on unearthing a history of Calcutta and not veer towards the larger province points to the new zeal to carefully unfold a triumphant narrative of the growth of the imperial capital from its supposed inception in 1690. The society needed, according to Firminger, a vigilance committee to keep its eye on vanishing Calcutta. In tracing the rise of the concept of heritage, François Hartog has precisely emphasized this notion of a crisis, when some awareness, more often than not uneasy, that something, whether an object, a monument, a site, or a landscape, had disappeared or was about to disappear, made authorities attentive towards preservation. But this concern with heritage was not only about the past or inherently backward looking, because, as Hartog mentions, and I quote, "We are dealing with a certain past, whose visible embodiment is important for the present." In case of Calcutta, Viceroy Curzon also professed similar notions. I quote, "In my own small way, I have tried to contribute to the historic interest and to the external beauties of this city," Curzon says. "My view is well known that no place and no country can afford to be so absorbed in the pursuit of its future as to forget its past. But in remembering the past, I have also had one eye fixed on the present and another on the future." So now, if we may digress a bit, let us briefly look at Curzon, who is talking about the past, the future, and the present of Calcutta, before coming back to the historical society. Curzon was an important figure at this point in Calcutta in organizing not only the past of Calcutta but also of the subcontinent. His efforts to preserve the heritage of India saw major changes in the archaeological department with the introduction of the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act in 1904. He was instrumental in restoring the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort, as well as erecting statues and plaques memorializing the Black Hole incident or the mutiny of 1857. He was very much invested in the past of Calcutta. For Curzon, Calcutta was, and I quote, and my quote, the title of the paper comes from here, "Calcutta was one great graveyard of memories." He waxed eloquence on a self-congratulatory mode, I must say, on the greatness of Calcutta. "Calcutta is the capital," he says, "not merely of a province, great as that province is, but of the Indian Empire. As such, it appears to me fitly to symbolize the work that the English have done and are doing in this country. For though of the enormous population of over 1 million souls that make up the city on both banks of the river, not much more than 30,000 are returned as Europeans and Eurasians, yet a glance at the buildings of the town, at the river and the roar and smoke, it is sufficient to show that Calcutta is in reality a European city set down on Asiatic soil, and that it is a monument, in my opinion, one of the most striking extant monuments, for it is the second city to London in the entire British Empire, to the energy and the achievements of our race." Curzon, who was responsible for the division of the province, himself did not support the decision to shift the capital of empire from Calcutta to Delhi. For him, Calcutta as a major commercial center on the sea was much more suited than the landlocked Delhi. He was also not very convinced by the argument of Delhi being centrally located within the empire. But he was most concerned about the fact that the shift would disengage the government from the public in general. Curzon opined that with the capital in Delhi, the government of India may become immersed in a sort of bureaucratic self-satisfaction. And I quote, "There was no fear of that when you went down to Calcutta. At Calcutta, you were in the surge and movement of life. There was a mixed society there. You heard opinions of every variety of form, opinions of merchants, bankers, traders, businessmen of every sort. There was the society of judges and lawyers, both European and native. There were the officials of local government. There was a regular stream of travelers and visitors coming into the country from all parts of the world. It was life. And when, after my long residence at Shimla, I went on my tours in the country in Calcutta, I felt once again life and movement throbbing around me. I say distinctly that our time at Calcutta was of enormous value to the government. It brightened our minds, it widened our outlook, it brought us into the mainstream of national life. There is serious danger that when you build your capital at Delhi, government will become more isolated, more bureaucratic, less in touch with public opinion than it is now." Curzon, as we all know, was the main actor behind the construction of a monumental building honoring Queen Victoria. It was part of his imperial vision. Monuments, buildings, statues would teach history more effectively than books, he believed. And this was important at the turn of the century. As historian Durba Ghosh suggests, monuments telling a triumphant history of empire were effective methods of silencing the challenges to the empire. And we must also remember that one of the first acts passed by Curzon was the Calcutta Corporation Act of 1899, which made provision for more government representatives, decreasing the number of elected members in the corporation. So it was not a surprise when Curzon wrote a congratulatory letter to the members of the Calcutta Historical Society. Curzon was by then back in England. In his letter to the society, Curzon charted out some of the issues that he thought that the society might find interesting to pursue. The list of issues gives us an insight into the understanding and nature of history that Curzon and the members of the society were interested in. Curzon asked, I quote, "How many of the residents of Calcutta, I wonder, are aware of the exact spot where Warren Hastings fought his duel with Francis? Of the identity of the various houses at Alipur which were owned or lived in by Hastings, of the house in which W.M. Thackeray was born, of the different buildings which were occupied as council houses by the Government of India, of the strange and romantic history of the big house at Khidirpur." He also cautioned the society regarding access to sources, as most of the relevant papers were hidden away in the archives either of the local government or the Government of India. Firminger also noted the importance of collecting documents. The society, the Calcutta Historical Society, planned to form specific committees to look for leases of old houses and properties in and around Calcutta. In his opening lecture to the society, Firminger mentioned that he planned to publish old parochial registers of baptism, marriages, and burials, as well as history of hospitals and educational institutions. A definite outline to trace the history of the city was thus put forward. From the fourth volume of the journal, Bengal Past and Present, which was published in 1909, the fourth volume, a series of essays started listing the number of marriages that took place among the Europeans in 18th century Calcutta. Similar essays were also published listing the burials in Calcutta in volume 5. In volume number 14 and 15, published in 1917, Firminger published articles titled Materials for the History of Calcutta Streets and Houses, 1780 to 1834. Studying the leases and deeds registered by public authority between 1780 and 1834, an extensive list of buying and selling of property in the city was also published. The essays also describe the social geography of the city during the late 18th and early 19th century with useful annotations with respect to the name of peoples and places, with extracts from Upjohn's map of Calcutta based on the survey conducted in 1792-93. As Firminger mentioned, the items were selected, quote, to trace the nomenclature, situation, and extent of that part of our city which is bounded by the Esplanade on the south and Lyons Range and Bow Bazaar on the north, Benting Street on the east and River on the west, and also Chorongi. A number of items have been given for the sake of biographical interest, and I have thought it worthwhile to afford evidence to show how the China Bazaar was once a place of residence for European merchants and lawyers, unquote. The volumes of the first decade of its publication carried articles that highlight various modes of presenting the past of the colonial metropolis. But as the contents of the journal reveal, an exclusive focus on Calcutta could not fill up the pages. There were definitely articles on other aspects of the region, but Calcutta, at least its European past, received a great deal of attention during these years. There were long excerpts from early documents of the East India Company and the diary of Justice John Hyde of the Supreme Court, photographic illustrations about various monuments and buildings of the city and its surroundings, and essays on various aspects of social and cultural life of the Europeans in the city. These articles framed the past of Calcutta in a certain mode that had immense influence on the books written on the history of Calcutta, both in English and the vernacular, during these early decades and in the later half of the 20th century as well. We have all used Bengal Past and Present for our own research to understand the history of Calcutta. So these were the years when that kind of history was being actually framed and narrativized in a certain mode. One of the main functions of the society in its initial years was to travel to various places of historical importance to the rise of which were important to the rise of the English power in Bengal. Visits were organized to Plassey, Baharampur, and Kasim Bazar, the first visits. A special first-class train carriage was arranged by the Eastern Bengal State Railway to facilitate the excursion. Along with the members of the society, a representative of the Bone and Shepherd accompanied the group to take photographs. These were the photographs that I wanted to show you. A map of the Battle of Plassey, views of the field and the Berhampur barracks were distributed among the tour party. The detailed tour description was published on the pages of the journal. The group boarded the train from Shialda at night and reached Plassey at 5 in the morning. A group of elephants, arranged by the Murshidabad Nawab, awaited them at the station and they proceeded towards the field of the famous battle. I quote from the journal, "An inspection of the field of battle followed. It was soon apparent that the whole day might profitably have been spent in the study of the various positions occupied by the contending armies. The river, it is true, has effaced a portion of the ground and the mango tope has gone. But it may be said with certainty that the remark often heard that to visit Plassey is merely to take a peep at an uninteresting expanse of mud and water is utterly false." With successive visits to the giant temple in Calcutta, places like Murshidabad and Srirampur, the excursion of the Calcutta Historical Society became a regular annual feature of the initial years. The editor, Walter Firminger, writes that the idea of our expedition was suggested to us by the Venerable Archdeacon of Calcutta at the Society's inaugural meeting, but I do not think that he or anyone else at the time could have dreamed that it would be possible for the Society to organize expeditions to places so far distant from Calcutta as are Berhampur and Murshidabad, and yet to show the pilgrims so much within less than 24 hours. The Society and the journal, however, ran into rough waters within a few years. Number of members were not sufficient and subscription for the journal were low. Questions were raised regarding the expenses incurred during the lavish excursions. The members contemplated merging the society with the Asiatic Society of Bengal and stopped the separate publication of the journal. Between 1911 and 1913, the society was dormant. No journal was published. In 1914, it came out with a new volume. It did not merge with the Asiatic Society. New committees were formed and the members were determined to solve the financial issues and publish the journal, even if the volumes were slimmer. The excursions were proved to be difficult to continue though. I now move on to my next section, and it's on the idea of modern urban planning in Calcutta. And so I go into the working of the CIT, the Calcutta Improvement Trust. The CIT was formed in 1911 to make extensive changes in the urban layout of the city. It was meant to usher in modern planning in Calcutta. The urban morphology got transformed with the steady rise of the suburbs. A new regime of urban planning wrought major changes in the rent economy and the burgeoning land market of the city with the coming of the CIT. And this history is quite well charted now by a lot of historians who have worked with the CIT materials. Among the various issues that the CIT dealt with, let me focus on one specific aspect to understand the way in which a new mode of thinking about Calcutta was brought forth. In terms of thinking about the cities, CIT decisively ushered in a new visual aesthetic. The observational modality, as described by Bernard Cohn for early colonial state and its officials, found a new dimension in the urban settings of late 19th and early 20th centuries. We may remember the Plague Album of Bombay, which meticulously detailed the sanitary project of the colonial state. The health reports of municipalities started to carry photographs of the despicable conditions of major cities from the late 19th century. E.P. Richards' report prepared for the CIT and published in 1914 had a host of photographs detailing both the condition of Calcutta and various other European cities to make a clear comparison. This visual representation through actual photographs, in addition to land and route maps, ushered in a new modality of planning. They framed the space of the city in terms of congested native dwellings with little or no ventilation, the almost vertical angle of sunlight penetrating the slums. A cursory reading of the various captions to the photographs illustrates the narrative strategy of these reports. It tells us about that part of the city, the position of the photographer, the angle of the sun rays. So these were some of the images which I wanted to show you. Apart from the report by Richards, we also have the joint report by Madden and Shrewsbury, who were the engineer and the chief valuer of CIT respectively. The report opens with residential areas of North Calcutta with the caption, quote, North Calcutta, showing density of buildings and absence of development roads. The proximity of Basti Ghats to good buildings is also apparent. A few pages later, there are two aerial views of South Calcutta with the title, quote, South Calcutta, showing effect of adequate development roads and tree planting in streets. Many scholars have now demonstrated the discursive strategy of colonial narratives in framing the urban space in terms of Black Town and White Town, which paid very little attention to the land use pattern of the indigenous population. They did not pay any attention, these colonial narratives did not pay any attention to the vibrant social and economic life of the neighborhood. And in terms of practice of surveying, describing, and visually representing the landscape, paintings and photographs had a long tradition in the subcontinent. In that sense, reports by Richards and others in the CIT were following a well-trodden path. However, I would also like to point out a rather curious chapter at the end of Richards' report. In a concluding section on aesthetics, he says that engineers and architects need to work in tandem to produce the new city. The mathematical mind of the engineers should be complemented by the artistic vision of the architect. Richards lamented that, quote, 90% of the British and Indian public do not believe that art is of any use, nor do they believe in art, unquote. But with the CIT, residents were needed to be made aware of the importance of aesthetics and its bearing on the people. Richards talked at length about the visual reordering of contemporary European capital cities and found that Calcutta can be reordered in that light with proper roads, boulevards, arcades, and statuary. He was aware of the problems before the trust. Quote, Calcutta conditions, the need of rigid economy and the paramount urgency of traffic needs all forbid absolutely in our city, except in one or two cases, the luxury of visceral planning, that is, creating new roads so that their vistas will be terminated by existing church towers, monuments, and the like. We have very few artistic focal objects, and it will be infinitely cheaper to create our beauty as we go. But he was convinced that, again quote, aesthetically, arcading done under good rules creates a most beautiful and ordered city. There is no valid reason why Calcutta should not come to be known as the city of arcades. We all know the city of palaces to be a myth, and Kipling's city of dreadful night to be much nearer the real thing at present, unquote. Photographs of European cities were inserted in Richards' report to give a concrete framing to his arguments. Boulevards, streets, arcades, bridges from Paris, Milan, Vienna found a space in his report. He wanted these to be the reference points. He proposed that at Calcutta, I quote, at Calcutta, the chief work of the artist and architect will be the formulation of control rules for the architecture and arcades in every great new intra-city road. Consideration and creation of visceral and other beauty, design of monuments and fountains in the large main roads, and most especially at their junctions and articulations. The production of artistic, harmonious, and delightful results in both present and future public parks, squares, and open places of Calcutta. The rearrangement of existing statuary, the creation of order and dignity in the chaotic and so artistically wasted Maidan, determination of general architectural rules and regulations as regards the three classes of suburbs. So apart from surveying the existing landscape, which he did in great detail, the land of the roadways of Calcutta, Richards also proposed a completely new aesthetic vision for the city. It was not about health, hygiene, and housing only, but rather about ornamentation, design, and beauty. In these ideas, we see echoes of Curzon's views on Calcutta. The visual aesthetic represented in these views, in terms of boulevards, arcades, fountains, monuments, statues, memorials, was an effort of careful rebuilding and rebranding. But this was not only about the future of the city. It was a careful recreation of the past by memorializing certain events and silencing or destroying other pasts. And here we find the Bengali voice. Again, I will not delve into the representation of the city and the urban life by Bengali intellectuals and writers during this period, but very briefly we can allude to the changing sensibilities regarding the city in the 20th century, especially in the wake of the changes wrought in by the CIT. The workings of the trust, with demolition of large buildings and dwellings in central Calcutta to create the wide Central Avenue running north from Esplanade, brought in a sense of nostalgia for the city which was absent in the previous decades. The grief is palpable in some of the Bengali fictions written in the following decades. Bimal Mitro opens his novel Saheb Bibi Ghulam, published in 1953, with the workings of the CIT. The central character is an engineer overlooking the demolition of a large palatial house to make way for the new city. This was narrated as an erasure of the life gone by, encapsulating an entire ethos of the urban life in 19th century Calcutta. As historian Richard Roger has argued, quote, demolition is a moment of rupture for local communities. It is the encapsulation locally of the tension between memory as a bond tying a community to the present and history as a problematic reconstruction of time past. Similarly, like Bimal Mitro, in his novel Agamikal, published in 1934, Premendra Mitro evocatively writes, and I quote, and I'm also translating the passage, the day brings in engineers' measuring tapes, the road rollers, account books of the contractor, and the crowbar of the coolies, while the full moon night moans. Perhaps both are real. The city is coming of age. Someone loses his garden, some the farmland. Huts with round leaves give way. The ponds fill up. Date, palm, and coconut trees bow down. The city is moving forward. So slowly the city expands, gobbling up the rural suburbs. It moves from the pristine calmness of the nature to the harsh sounds of crowbars, cold rationality of tapes and accounts, to the calculating landlords and burgeoning rent economy. The progress of the urban entails a loss. It invariably creates memories, erasing the present. It is this scheme of transition and evolution that was at the heart of Patrick Geddes, a Scottish sociologist, town planner, and thinker who visited India in the early decades of the 20th century. The last part of the presentation, Geddes. Geddes prepared a report on the densely packed Borobajar area of Calcutta in 1919. The Calcutta Corporation entrusted him with this job to get a different view of the matter from the British-controlled CIT. His lectures at the town hall of Calcutta had already established Geddes as somewhat of an outsider in planning circles. The CIT members were not at all enthused with his ideas. E.P. Richards' mammoth report on the improvement of Calcutta was already published, and as discussed, Houseman's thinking was the guiding force behind the report, as were ideas of several other contemporary continental town planners. Other plans were also put forward by members of the CIT, like Dr. Craig and Shrosby, the chief valuer of the CIT. These reports suggested demolition and partial rebuilding of the densely packed areas. As historian Parthu Dotto summarizes, the logic of these plans indicated that the allocation of streets, sewers, and railway lines seemed the only way to order the city. Geddes, on the other hand, had a unique understanding of city and urban planning, quite different from Houseman and the rectilinear grid system that had dominated the subject both in the metropolitan centers as well as the colonies from the latter half of the 19th century. For Geddes, the city was an agent in human evolution and history. According to him, human life has two types of connections with the past. One is organic connection with earlier family members and therefore past generations of mankind. The other is the human heritage, both the material heritage of traditions and other conventions of a community's social life. Geddes writes that the city is a, quote, specialized organ of social transmission. It is the vehicle of acquired inheritance. It accumulates and embodies the cultural heritage of a region and combines it with the cultural heritage of larger units, national, racial, religious, human. It stamps the resultant product upon each passing generation of its citizens. The city receives the experiences of each passing generation and hands the record on to the next. It is the instrument primarily of the regional memory, but serves also as the memory of larger groups. In this evolutionary scheme of things, for Geddes then, cities occupied an important place, more important than books or museum, to transmit the cultural heritage of mankind. This understanding of the urban informs his report on Borobajar. He was keen to pay respect to the organic growth of the cities, where every building, nook and corners, irregularities had their own specific uses. He wanted to preserve this unity while creating a new set of order. He wrote that, quote, as students of cities, what we need are interpretations, sociological and civic, that is, on one hand, in terms of social life and psychology from which buildings of each type arise, and of the movements these express, and on the other, of the main types of city development which are their fullest concrete expression and which react in their turn on the mental world of their inhabitants. Geddes wanted to preserve the intimate spaces of the city, the neighborhood, the community, the family. And for Bajar, he wanted to preserve the character of the place by retaining traditional urban forms. He was appreciative of the varied urban forms of pre-modern India. As Parthasattva analyzes, he was impressed with the functional character of Indian building traditions, the adaptation to weather, the use of local material, the multiple use of public spaces, the small-grain character of street life. He argued that these practices were sensitive to the ecology of the regions and therefore needed to be recovered and reinstated. Geddes followed the survey method, where he went through the narrow alleys of the place doing literally a house-to-house survey. He distinguished two main blocks in Bajar, the big business block and the residential quarters. He wanted to preserve the character of the place by retaining the residential area in the northeast while developing parts of the west into a modern business district. But in this rebuilding and destruction of insanitary parts, he wanted to keep in mind the traditional urban form. He argued for 4-story blocks of houses where the lower two would remain for business purposes, while the upper floors would be laid out in the fashion of the traditional Indian courthouse for residential use. He was against any kind of displacement of the laboring population from the region. Rather than demolishing the entire area, he wanted to preserve the traditional way of life by repairing the buildings and the insanitary areas. He held out unique solutions to age-old problems. One such case was the nuisance corners, where two walls meet at a right angle. We all know what purpose they serve. To keep these spaces clean, he suggested to put up small temples. Also, he proposed to plant trees in the little spaces between the houses. But for the planners of CIT, more specifically, these were simply idiosyncratic whims. Temples in the so-called nuisance corners, as Chief Valuer Strasby commented, would freeze those areas in perpetuity and no further demolition would be possible. Again, the small alleys and spots between houses were the garbage dumps. Trees would hardly make them sanitary. Thus, Geddes's ideas were rejected as financially unviable, too idealistic, and utterly ineffective. Helen Miller has suggested that in Geddes's report, the clash between the interest of the market and the interest of the people were direct and stark, and that he found himself committed to trying to put his civic reconstruction doctrine with its commitment to places and people in an urban context hostile to such priorities. But in his worldview, what we find a recognition of the community living in the neighborhood, a recognition of a particular way of life, the creation of a sense of heritage amidst the utter waywardness of Indian urbanism. Geddes acknowledged the contribution of the indigenous population in shaping the urban space, which was totally absent from any discussion of, let's say, Kazan, Calcutta Historical Society, Bengal Past and Present, or the CIT. Meeting with people of the Bajar area provided him with a sense of the daily life and working of the district in its various branches, and this is a quote, of working of the district in its various branches of activity and of these in their action and reaction with the city as a whole, unquote. So I conclude here, there's a conclusion, very tentative. The presentation looked at the process of memorialization and narrativization of an urban space through different textual and material strategies. It tried to show how diverse strands of political and cultural thought came together in the early decades of the 20th century Calcutta to create a sense of belonging to the city. For both the European and Indian residents, the city gained importance. Claiming Calcutta became crucial to define the past as well as to organize the future. In this regard, the planning initiatives played a pivotal role. The old gave way to the new, and people churned up nostalgic paeans for the bygone. New ideas about history and heritage helped produce the urban space. Diverse efforts at retracing a triumphalist past, preserving a vanishing present, and ordering a perfect future produced the colonial urban space of Calcutta during the first half of the 20th century. And this particular vision of the city and its spatial order I suggest, argue, whatever, this particular vision of the city and its spatial order dominated much of the histories of colonial Calcutta, written during that period and also during the post-colonial period. Thank you.
Which will show us the spectacular photos that you have been talking about, and we are all really eager to see.
Some of the images from Bengal past and present. So this is visit to Plassey, and as you can see, the elephants. These were there to receive the party from Calcutta, and they took them to the battlefield. On the bottom, we have the monument at the center of the site. This is again also from Bengal past and present. The upper image is Nand Kumar's house at Paschimbanga, where they went, and the lower half we see the Baharampur Residency Cemetery. This rough map of Murshidabad was also distributed to the members of the touring party, so that they know where they are going and what are the historical places that they are visiting. So chief places of interest, and so what we see is that not only in the textual narrative, but also through images and through these kind of maps, they were the journal was trying to actually write a past of so the journal. Yeah. So through these, not there were articles and essays, but also through these images and these maps, the journal actually was trying to create a history for Calcutta and Bengal and the rise of the English power in India. So, these are the images from the journal, and also, so again at Murshidabad with the elephants, then crossing the Bhagirathi on elephants. So these are, so the description of the travel is very interesting, and also these pictures show us how, most of these people were European residents of Calcutta, and they wanted to see the place, actual place from where it all started. And that kind of also framed the history of Calcutta and Bengal in certain ways. So now, so this is from the report by Madden and Shrewsbury, City and Suburban Main Road Projects, joint report. These images are important in the way they are framing the city at this point. So this is an image of North Calcutta. And the caption says that it's showing the density of buildings and absence of development roads. The proximity of Basti hearts to the good buildings is also apparent. So this was one of the major kind of analysis that these reports carried, was that in Calcutta we have these irregularities. We have grand buildings and then we have bastis. The facades are not regular. They have various architectural styles jostling with each other. So these was something which these planners say that this is something that no European city, no great modern city would kind of allow. So even in Chorongi, you have elements where you have a new classical building. With that, you have two shops. So that is something that, so that's why Richards is saying that in Calcutta we need arcades. We need arcades like Vienna, we need arcades like Paris, which will actually create a regular frontage. So that is something that was very important for them visually, aesthetically. So comparing the North Calcutta side with the South Calcutta part, South Calcutta showing showing effect of adequate development, roads and tree planting in streets. So this is how the great divide between the North and the South was being kind of narrated and formulated, and also that kind of got entrenched in the history of the city for more than 100 years. And we have all discussed the division between the white town and the black town. So what they were doing is that they were having these, and these aerial pictures were very important in creating and sustaining that idea that, look, this is dense and this is good, clear neighborhood. A typical basti, again, look at the angle of the photograph. Always the photographs are always taken from above to give you a panoramic view. The lower half, the caption says, what I was talking about, diverse buildings on a typical main road. So diverse buildings. So the frontage is irregular. It's not creating a visually aesthetically pleasing look for the city. The upper one, it says Canning Street, showing footpath abuse, use of roadway by pedestrians, and monopoly of the remainder of roadway by traffic proceeding in one direction. Very much common in Calcutta even today. The lower half says junction of Canning Street and Chitpur Road, showing typical traffic congestion. So all of these are kind of creating an image for the city which needs to be kind of rectified. This is the upper picture, typical development road in the north of the city. Again, a mixed land use pattern, people on the street, cows on the street. The lower half, Rosha Road, the main suburban traffic route south of the city. This is again important, Rawdon Street, part of White Calcutta, showing how, but here again also showing how go-downs upon road frontages destroy the amenities of a street. So it's again a mixed use pattern of Calcutta which they are constantly pointing out, and that they're saying that this is not done. This is not a modern city. You cannot have go-downs with the residential buildings. Kamak Street, illustrating a typical treatment of development road. So you have trees on both sides. You do not have those kind of buildings. It's a good road. This is from Richard's report. Again, if you see the top left corner image, it's very similar to this one. This image, the top image. So you have a similar kind of images in both these reports. So again, Richards is also pointing out the traffic in the lanes, and he is also mentioning the exact point where the photographer is standing. So for the first image, he is saying traffic in the lanes. Writer is at a point where the proposed Maniktola Avenue crosses. The next image, traffic in the lanes, between Canning Street and Harrison Road, note the upward extension of planless slum in background. So it's always that they are trying to figure and trying to frame the city in certain ways that will give you the idea of congestion, give you a vision of congestion without going into the detail of the land use pattern and the land use the life in these areas. And if you look at the position of the camera, if you look at the way these images are being taken, it's always kind of a long shot view. It's not a close view. It's always a long shot view. And if you compare this with the Plague album of Bombay, again, published in 1905, you will see similar images where there are long shot views where the colonial state is actually intervening in the neighborhoods. They're sanitizing the neighborhoods with lime water and all those stuff. So with engines coming in and people standing at one side. So it's always a long shot view which gives you an idea of the gaze of the colonial state in certain ways. So these images are kind of they depict the congested so-called native town, the black town, and so these are the images. So what I argue is that these were the ways through which not only the textual narratives of Bengal past and present, but also these kind of images they gave the colonial authorities at that point of time and also later day researchers an idea of the city to narrate the city in terms of the black town and the white town, and without going or without questioning or reading these sources critically or without understanding the kind of colonial power behind these images, these narratives, these essays, so the textual and the material narratives, they were kind of, they created the history of Calcutta during the early decades of 20th century. And so what I'm trying to suggest here is that from the 20th century, from the early decades of the 20th century, Calcutta's history started to gain prominence, where there was this idea of reordering the city, planning for the future, but also planning for the future in a certain way that will give an understanding, create an understanding of the past of the city. So the present was actually dealing with both the past and the future of the city, and which kind of created the idea of Calcutta, created the idea of 19th century Calcutta as a city which, so I discussed mostly the European point of view, but at the same time in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, we have the native, not native, quote unquote native, the Bengali writers were also discussing Calcutta in a certain way. So as part of the modernist literary movement, Calcutta or city life or urban life was becoming important in their writings, and cities were seen as something which was kind of a place for progressive politics, a place for modernist ideals. Architecturally, Art Deco movement started. So all of these things were happening in other sectors. So it's one part of the story.
With the technology, I think we can go straight ahead to the questions while we also set up the stage for the next segment. If you do have a question, we have a microphone here with Poshali, and if you ask, please feel free to ask your question in both Bangla and in English, and maybe also Hindi if Moni is comfortable with it. But please also do introduce yourself before you ask the question. I have only one thing to say. Most of everything that I had to say is written in my notebook, which is right now under the projector, so I can't access it. But I was thinking how if 100 years later, we are going to also again write the history of the city at this point of time, we will be revisiting some of the same arguments. We will be looking at how photographs are used to capture and museumize the crumbling colonial buildings, not to preserve them, but to preserve their memory. Earlier, the Bone and Shepherd people probably did that along with the Past and Present Journal. Now, amateur photographers and videographers do it for Instagram Reels. But the impetus is the same, that while you cannot hold on to the city of the past, you museumize it in a manner that the city of the future does not forget its past. Also, very, very interestingly, I was thinking that these photographs that you showed us become possible only when there are these mixed kinds of localities. Because how do you take an aerial shot of shanties if you don't have a gigantic house right next to it? Because you do not have, like, you're probably not taking it from a plane. You cannot, that technology is not available. So even in order to justify the decrying of this mixed use, you need the mixed use. So even your justification requires this technological intervention. Anyway, that is all that I have to say as of now. Please do ask the questions if you have any questions, comments, reflections, ruminations. Everything's welcome.
My name is Mondira Shin, and we are an independent publisher called Sri Shammo. And I was thinking that this mixed combination that you talk about, isn't that the Indian genius? You have a mansion and then you have a bosti. Akuno, with this new Udita, Udayon, and whatever it is they have in Gurugram called Begonia, Camellia, what have you, you have the same thing, except the bostis have become perhaps a little less visual. You don't see them that much behind Begonia or Camellia, whatever they're called. So, where did the idea that we have to follow Vienna, Milan, which have different societies? There too, I think the poor of 19th and 20th century Milan must have been pushed out. Vienna, I don't know, but when Paris was being done by that Baron Haussmann, he demolished huge bits. And there was much lamentation of the old Paris disappearing and something a bit sterile coming up. And I think the Hôtel de Ville is one of the old areas which people love because of this. But the black town and the white town, that was the main divide, wasn't it? All this program was really to make the white town aesthetically more beautiful. Do you think? Just like Delhi's Latian area, also characterless, however big and smart it is.
In Calcutta in the early 20th century, there were two imaginations. One was the imagination of Europeans looking back at the history of Calcutta. And there was another imagination of the Indians, Bengalis, who were looking in the future, who were trying to build a new nation. A nation was being formed here. And if you look at that time, it was a time of building institutions. A large number of, including Calcutta University, Jadavpur University, Vishwabharati here, a large number of schools, colleges, libraries were being built for the future nation. So how do you compare these two imaginations at work?
So, for your question, yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea that we need to build Calcutta, so this was only an idea. It never got, I mean, it was not possible. I mean, Reachers also knew, CIT also knew that this is not possible. They can't actually demolish the entire city and rebuild it. It's not Napoleonic Paris. But CIT did demolish a lot of houses. So in the Central Avenue that the CIT actually constructed, that actually changed the entire locality. Ritojyoti has walked on this, and he has shown that how, with the building of the Central Avenue, it actually changed the composition of the entire stretch. With the poorer lot, they were moved out of that area, and when the new road came up, the adjacent land plots, they became much they were more expensive, and not even the Bengali elites could buy them. So the Marwaris and others, with the business people, they actually bought those lands and built their houses there. So the composition of the entire central Calcutta area changed with this kind of planning project that the CIT had. So this was all of these, this idea of aesthetic, this idea of beauty. What I was trying to say is that this was a dream in certain sense, that we want to do this but in kind of arguing for that kind of, so there were two things. One, they were arguing that we want this is how a modern city should look like, and they were also criticizing the Indian land use pattern by saying that, look, you are filthy, these are congested areas, these are not good. So the major impetus was that these are not sanitary areas. We need help. So the plague scare was very important. That plague happened because of this kind of building patterns. So we need to demolish these areas, we need clear roads and all of this stuff. But that was not possible financially. You need money to do all of these things. So that was not possible. But the idea that we want Calcutta to become like a city of Europe, that was there. And so all this comparison with all of these cities. But by doing that comparison, what these reports did was to create this idea that these were unhealthy areas and these are the good areas. That idea, that separation between the north and the south, I argue that this was the period when this division was actually talked of, and that endured. So that is something that this is not only about writing the history of Calcutta during the early decades of 20th century, but this endured throughout the 20th century. That is something that I'm trying to say. Yeah. Sorry. Imaginations. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I didn't go there. So that is also, so at the same moment when these people were talking about the past and about reorienting the future, the Bengalis were actually talking about the future. So Calcutta Corporation, that was very important in terms of municipal politics. So in terms of institutions, as you mentioned, that they were trying to kind of claim Calcutta from the British. These people, and not only in terms of building institutions or claiming a position in the corporation, but also in terms of Marxist politics, also in terms of writers group. They were all over the city during this, and all these memoirs, and two very important magazines, Kollol and Porichoy, their groups and their addas, and you have a kind of a image of the city in their writings. Buddhadev Boshu, another very important figure who is a modern person. and who is writing about Calcutta in a much more effective way than any other author during this time. He's writing about Clive Street. So there's a fascinating, I'm always fascinated by the short article called Clive Street, a Chant. And there's a fascinating short essay called Bathroom. So he is actually writing, these are essays, so essay as a form is also very modern, very new, and he is borrowing that from European literature. So he's writing about the city in a very poetic manner, but he is writing essays, he is writing about the city in a very poetic manner, which we do not find in 19th century literature. So obviously there was an imagination of the city for the present and also for the future. You're absolutely, I mean, I don't want to say correct, but what you're pointing out is very important, but that's another part of my kind of what project is.
Mundiradi and where Shamuta ended, and also from your paper. Yeah, my voice is also bad today. The thing is, I'm curious about one thing that as far as I could make sense of your presentation, I kind of felt that the idea of nostalgia that gets built, when we talk about today's Kolkata, the past and all, it comes from these imageries that you showed, which has a distinct element of colonialism in it. So would you say, and because Mandiradi mentioned Delhi, I was wondering then what is so peculiar about Kolkata, or isn't there anything peculiar about Kolkata? It just comes from the fact that it used to be British capital once and which shifted later to Delhi. So maybe Kolkata and Delhi are comparable. So is the element of nostalgia, if we talk about cities of India, restricted to these two cities? If not, then how do we think, how do we make sense of this? I mean, if it is only connected with colonial rule, and then the poetry and all those writers that you're mentioning in the 19th century, do they have influence of the colonial rule, and is it inflicted in some way? I mean, this is what I got a sense. I mean, I can be completely wrong. I don't know whether I made sense though.
Scholars have studied these ideas of nostalgia, of memory in cities, and it's not only about colonial cities. So it's you can have a memorial like, so let's say Jallianwala Bagh Memorial, and fantastic work there's by Shormishta Dattagupta. So there you have a memorial which is not a colonial memorial, but it's a nationalist, remembrance, nationalist kind of a memorial. So nostalgia for a city, I mean, now in Calcutta you have nostalgia for the 70s. So it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need a colonialism. But what Shamuta was also telling, that when you capture an image, when you are trying to say that I am capturing this image to preserve this crumbling building or whatever. So what I was trying to say in the presentation, and what my larger project is also about, that when you're capturing that image, you're only memorializing a certain past, right? And in that process, you are silencing other pasts. You're erasing other pasts. So this is the kind of the politics of image, right? So it's really a conjuncture that in the early 20th century, we see a host of actors, Curzon, Geddes, Richards and others, and even the Bengali writers, all of them are talking about the city in various ways. So, but in those writings, in their understanding, in their imagination of the city, we see not only they were talking about their present, that is the early 20th century, but they are also talking about the past, as well as they had an imagination for the future. So in a sense, they were all talking about the present in certain ways, but they were also talking about the past and the future. And if we stretch it a bit further, we can say that, and what Francois Hartog says about heritage and regimes of historicity, his book, that we are always presentist. We are always thinking about our present, even when we are thinking about the past or the future. So whether I would like to follow that path, that I don't know. But what I see in the early 20th century is that all of these actors, they're talking about their present, but in the process, they are talking about the past and the future.
You see, CIT had some success in modern town plan. I mean, of course, I mean, Central Avenue and Mission Row, or Ganesh Chandra Avenue. I think that also was part of the CIT scheme. Now, you see, Rashveri Avenue and Southern Avenue, I mean, the main biggest project CIT undertook was the Dhakuria Lakes, and then the creation of Southern Avenue, and I think also Rashveri Avenue to some extent, right? And then, you know, creating plots. And now Rashveri Avenue has become unrecognizable, but till about 40 years ago, you could see regular facade and houses and all that. So, and then CIT was joined by Nolini Sarkar and Hindustan Park and Hindustan Road. And I'm not sure about New Alipur. I mean, that's Nolini Sarkar, but whether CIT was involved in New Alipur, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I mean, it'll be an interesting question, because what was New Alipur before New Alipur?
Everyone, my name is Sujay Mochari. I am PhD research scholar in the Department of History, Jadavpur University. So I have a question that Devajani Bhattacharya, in his book Empire and Ecology, he wrote, near the Ganga rivers there was forming so many, you know, that temples, bazaar itself also. Apart from this, after the partition 1971, Gargi Chakrabarti, he wrote in her book, you know, facing the partition, you know, the problem of so many, you know, Bangladeshis, they are migrated. They are, you know, mostly living in the Jadavpur, Karjinagar, Oshimnagar, itself in Madhumgram and Shodhpur, even the Sialdas also. That time, actually my question is that, you know, that time there was most of the places are wetland, you know. So I have question that, is that, you know, extended Kolkata which is contributed by Bangladeshi people? That's my question. And another question is that, do you think that, you know, Kolkata itself only centric of the Kolkata? Because when we are talking about the mostly, you know, urbanization, only about, we are talking about the Kolkata. But apart from the before Kolkata, there was, you know, formation of Murshidabad also. We are mostly talking about the Kolkata centric. The things are why. I have actually curious to know about the things. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, so obviously Kolkata, when we are talking about Calcutta, it's, so two things. The period that I was talking about, so it's for now, it's only a part of Calcutta, right? So the period that, the areas that you're talking about, like Jadavpur and other areas, obviously after partition, those areas, the colonies were erected, those areas also started to come up, and those were then incorporated within Calcutta, right? So where the city ends and where the suburb starts, that's a very difficult question. I mean, administrative categories are there, but how do you see yourself? Whether, so Barakpur today or Baruipur today has Calcutta pin codes. Whether a person residing in Baruipur feels like a person residing in Calcutta, or whether a person who is living in Bhawanipur will take a person from Baruipur as his fellow citizen, I don't know. I mean, these are perceptions, right? That whether you are from a city or not, where the city ends, how the city, what are the, so, but what is important that in the early 20th century, when the CIT was planning various things, they were always saying that we need to plan the suburbs. We need to incorporate more areas into Calcutta proper, because otherwise the pressure on Calcutta, the demographic pressure on Calcutta is too much. So we need to decongest the areas. So when we are building a road, so we need to move the people away. Where will these people go? They will go into the suburbs. So that means that we need a better communication system. That means we need to increase the tramways. So tramways also is increasing during this time. So all of these were connected. How you plan the city is connected to the ways you incorporate the adjacent areas. And after 47, obviously, Calcutta kind of moved in the north and in the south, and it kind of became a much larger entity. And today with Salt Lake, and then with Salt Lake and Newtown, it's a much larger area.
So with this question, we shall end this segment of our discussion, but not before I say 2-3 words about how no, 2-3 sentences about how this work also connects to CRG's long-standing work on the city of Calcutta, one of which has been the book Refugees in West Bengal, which has just been translated into Bangla and is now also available for everybody to read, which takes into account exactly what you were discussing, the questions of the city making with partition and also 1971 war. We've also made 3 short films on the city of Calcutta. That's called the Calcutta Migrant City series, which is also again available on YouTube, in which we talk about these different moments of migration that create the city of Calcutta. So although over the last few months, maybe 9 months, 7 months, we have been doing these 8 lectures called City Lights, the city of Calcutta in its myriad manifestations, especially ecological. We have somebody who has worked extensively in CRG about Kolkata and climate, about Newtown. The first book about Rajarhat Newtown was published by CRG, I think in 2016, would it be 16, 15, 13, 2013. So this has been part of our larger work, and if you are interested, we encourage you and also everyone else to look us up on the website and on YouTube, and of course to visit our library. But with this, once again, thank you, Moni, also for bearing with so many technological challenges and advancements, and for never losing your composure, which I would have done. And thank you for this excellent lecture, and we are so keen to see where it goes. And so maybe one more round of applause for this very, very exciting presentation, and for also bringing those images out of the archives to us. For the last part of this evening's discussion and deliberation, I will request our friend, Professor Ranobi Shomadar, who's also Professor Emerita at Calcutta Research Group, and is the author of many, many books, the last of which, the most recent of which, is called Biopolitics from Below, which was published maybe last week or the week before, to come. He's also one of the people who have been the central conceptualizers of the City Lights lecture series, as well as the Making and Unmaking of Cities online course. But also, Professor Shomadar's CIFAR Fellowship enables us to do this work. He introduced the series with the lecture Urban Politics, Biopolitics and the Urban Turn, and we request you to kindly also deliver the concluding comments to this series.
Few closing comments, and Shamata began by noting something which, wandering about through the day, would we be discussing in English in Bangla Akademi? So this is also a problem for me. So what I shall do is that I do not know whether this part is being recorded or is it at all necessary to record. Otherwise, I can mix both Bengali and English to offer my comments. But if it is necessary for record, then of course in English. In any case, Moni's presentation brings out something which in urban literature some have started using, but I have used that phrase, that it's a classic case of what we may call southern urbanization. And what he has described is not only true of Kolkata, but it is true of many cities, and this is happening now. We are now preparing a volume entitled City as the Southern Question after Gramsci. And there is 2 essays in that volume, one on Beirut, another on Athens, where the writers show exactly the things that Moni has described in great details, the paradoxical nature of gentrification, the way in which the colonial town is divided, etc. I think the idea of southern urbanization, which interrogates the widely assumed notion that there is a global pattern of urbanization, that urbanization doesn't suffer from a fundamental fault line that runs all through the idea, is something that needs to be taken seriously into account. And therefore, when we think of Kolkata, or for that matter, any important city of the South, there are very good histories of Shanghai, of Cairo, Lagos, Mexico, etc. So we think through the urban. The urban is therefore the optic. It is not only we are describing or historicizing a city, but the city produces the urban. So the urban and the city, they are not the same thing. We describe a city. The city is in some sense, therefore it's a bit of a Hegelian way of saying things, but in some sense then, the city is the material form of what we today think as the urban. But if we ask ourselves what is urban, then we at times fall back on certain immaterial characteristics, but which are materialized only through this form to which we have given the name city. In that sense, we are not only conceptualizing southern urbanization, of which the colonial past is an intrinsic element, but also we are recentering the South itself in the history of urbanization. That without the way in which southern cities have developed, it is very difficult to make sense of what is happening to cities, and therefore Paris of Napoleon III or the reconstruction of London after repeated fires and plagues, these may appear at certain level to be, they are reenacting the southern history, or they are exceptions. The general rule is the way in which these southern cities have been created. I'll give you one example. Let's say university. Now, Indian cities would not necessarily have universities. Medieval towns would not necessarily have universities. Universities might have been set up elsewhere, away from the bustling trading marts of those centuries. But if you think of Western city, you cannot think of a city without a university. In fact, the university would be, and the establishment of the red light quarters, these would be the two important requirements to make a city. And today, as you can see, with the establishment of universities as at the heart of the city, urban politics takes new turn, and the idea of the South as presenting a particular history of the city is something that is problematized. Moni has spoken very clearly on the way in which land becomes crucial, recycling of land becomes crucial. And I think one can derive a more fundamental point from that how not in the way in which we had traditionally understood rent, ground rent, but the way in which we understand differential rent, and the way in which rent becomes the crucial factor in the making and unmaking of a city, is something that the history of the southern cities tells us. It also tells us, to which Moni alluded, but I think again very important, that you cannot think of a city without law. The city requires laws, administrations, measures to govern people. And one has to only remember the classic lectures by Foucault on security, territory, population, where, as you know, Foucault, in historically outlining the emergence of the modern city in the 16th and 17th centuries, described also what he said, that there were this rise of modern governmentality, the rise of modern legal regimes, the rise of modern governmental regimes, which enable the city to emerge in its modern form. But southern researchers have shown, including subaltern studies historians, but many others have shown that the southern city has equally this north-south division. In other words, a section which is governable through laws and another section which is ungovernable. And that section is always managed through a combination of legal and illegal and administrative measures. And that section of population survives in the universe of what you may call semi-legality. And this is again something that the history of the northern cities would be alien to. We need to question, therefore, as we conclude our lecture series, public lecture series, how much of law is essential and how much of management. Management is something which, in India, we are very familiar. If you board a train and you are passing through one of the northern provinces, again north and the south, that you enter in a coach where you have a reserved seat and people will come and will ask you, thoda sa manage kar lijiye, ho jayega, and will you ask you to push yourself inside so that he or she too can see. So managing things is something which is beyond law, which transgresses law, which transcends law, and that is how the city is managed. So the city is no longer legally administered. The city is only partially legally administered, and the city, other half, is always managed. And that gives rise to this idea of surplus population, surplus areas in terms of areas which are gray areas, areas which are in a way represent the fractured geography of a city, area ruled by or managed by a large, what you may call, array of tools which speak of semi-legality. With law, you cannot manage the city. You can only administer the city, only part of it. I think that also shows one of the essential things that came out from the public lectures, but I wish that we were able to continue the lecture series, maybe by another 3 or 4, in a way so that things that have been left out, but that are crucial for bringing out the notion of southern urbanization. One of these, as I say, is that if you read even the most left literature on the city, one can speak of Lefebvre, one can speak of David Harvey, many others, we take this idea of the right to city. And there is this old biblical idea of the cities of refuge. And some of you may know that from the 1990s, early 1990s, there was a movement which still continues, but not in the same energy, where intellectuals, writers, celebrities, cosmopolitanists, they all came together and they revived the old biblical concept of the city or the cities of refuge. As you know, the Old Testament says of the 18 cities who decided that all the tribes which will be considered as enemy tribes would be given shelter. So the cities of refuge, the idea was revived on the ground, that the mayors of these cities would be ready to give shelter to refugees. But who were these refugees? There is a famous lecture or a series of 2 lectures by Jacques Derrida, and the title of that small book is On Cosmopolitanism, where Derrida is arguing that city is essentially cosmopolitan. The city is essentially welcoming a rainbow of ideas, trends, populations, etc. But what these cities of refuge movement missed, even though it was a very noble movement and an ideal movement, was that you don't give right to the migrants simply claim it. So the right to city, what happens to all those people who are still not urbanized? Think of Indian urbanization. I read a book very recently. It compares experiences of Chinese urbanization and Indian urbanization, and writes in fascinating details about the similarities. And one of the similarity is this rise of the small towns. So if you today see India, Shamata, just tell me to stop whenever. I'm just, the notes are there, but. So another Calcutta is not being created. Another Mumbai will not be created, perhaps. But on the other hand, what is happening in India is the emergence of what is called the census towns. And the census towns earlier were towns where population was limited to 5,000, now it is 10,000. What is a census town? A census town is merely an administrative category, but the planners, the urban visionaries, all of them, who are thinking of the future urbanization of the country, they think that these census towns will be the areas which are to be developed, etc. And the census towns are, in a way, big villages. But on the other hand, they are not simply big villages, and it would be wrong to say that they are big villages. But they are what in India is called census town. In China, they have a different name. But again, you can see that cities are claimed. Cities are not given. The right to city, nobody will give you the right to city. You come to the city and you claim your space in it. And that is how migrants leave their space. I think on the question of the division of the north and the south, if you allow me a few more minutes, Shamata, I will remark in a mood of bit of our own self-criticism, is that when we, and I will take a little more time in explaining why I am referring to that. When we picked up this phrase city lights, or this word inspired by Chaplin's classic, now city lights speaks not of infrastructure. City lights, if you say, is the guiding idea of the lecture series, behind the lecture series. City lights speak of speaks of a sensory world, a world which is governed by senses. And if you recall the movie, you will see why I'm making this comment. And so the division of the north and south is certainly a division of the colonial and the nationalist, division of the indigenous and certainly the colonial, but also a division of the material and the sensual. And at the same time, this division or this partition, which some of the, as you know, theorists are calling the partition of the senses, that our senses are partitioned. And therefore, in the partition of the sensory world, you have the reappearance of a much more fundamental partition that operates all through the urban history and urban world. I just do not have any time to explain that, but all I can say is that the classic case, the ultimate case would be, let us say, Johannesburg, or let us say Cape Town, which are known as apartheid cities. Or let us say, you can think of Jerusalem. You can think of many other cities which are the ultimate partition cities. In other words, they are the apartheid cities. But that apartheid is only the ultimate of what is operating in all the cities, which is the partition of the areas of the city, partition of the senses of the city, partition of the urban sensibilities. And that is where I think we did not explore adequately. Perhaps we should have explored a little more on the sensory world. There is something very good and extremely interesting or incisive point that Muni in his lecture has brought out, which is that how do you historicize future? Future is apparently that which will be following, it will not precede history. Raymond Williams in his famous book, City and the Countryside, or Countryside and the City, I'm forgetting the...
Country and the City.
Country and the City. Now, in one of the chapters, Raymond Williams begins with this, the theme or the title of the chapter is Future and the City. And Raymond Williams says that city has a quality, which is that city always draws future thinking individuals, and city always provokes you to think of the future. And Raymond Williams then writes in detail, I am not going into that, on why is it, what is this quality that this materiality called the city has in it that provokes you to think of the future. And yet, as Muni was suggesting, that this future is something which is so much posited in your present and in your past. So one of the things that I could have, and I'm thinking of, all of you have, I'm quite sure you have read Rokea's famous book, and for rightly or maybe mysterious reasons wrote in English, Sultana's Dream. Now Sultana's Dream is about a hypothetical city. A hypothetical city where, as you know, Rokea speaks of aerial transportation, where all the war-making individuals, male individuals, will be banished or imprisoned. So if you read Sultana's Dream, you have the dream of what an ideal city would be in the eyes or in the mind of a southern individual, particularly a woman who was thinking more than a century ago what the city of the future should be. So future thinkings are multifarious. They have the same kind of variety, and they have the same kind, they inhabit the same conflicting landscape that the present inhabits and the past inhabited. So today, if you go to 1990s, the left front regime negotiated with Asian Development Bank and all that, and Calcutta 2020 vision was prepared. The government got money. Many of the bastis got electric light, power. There was potable water connection, etc., etc. Now, Calcutta 2020 is a classic post-colonial future envisaging exercise. Yet, what the point that I'm trying to tell is that there is therefore an ambiguity about the future. Rokea's vision of the future and CMDA and ADB's vision of the future is open-ended. The city actually shows that the future cannot be confined to one particular imagination. The final thing, I think, that came out partly from Paula's lecture, but I think that probably we needed, as I said, one or two more, to address the question of the urban virtues. And care is one of the most important urban virtue. We had a very important lecture, which was the opening lecture in the 7-day, in the making and unmaking of the city, the online course that we organized. And the inaugural lecture was given by Professor Simon Goldhill, who is or has just retired, a very well-known Cambridge professor on ancient Greek. And he was telling us that this idea of the virtue and how come and whence the idea of the virtue became so important in our urban thinking. that the city is a place of crime, that the city is a place of lust, of avarice, of loot, of murders, etc. The city is no city if the city doesn't have an underworld. So therefore you have the rise of the notion of the virtue. And interestingly, again, this word care is one such virtue which we value very much. But look how open-ended it is, that if you think of the city, then the city is one of the important elements in the making of the city is care economy. So the Eastern Metropolitan Bypass, now called probably Bangla Sharoniya, Bangla Sharoniya. So it has hospitals, at maybe after 3 or 4 kilometers, big hospitals dotting either side of this great bypass, from Apollo to whatnot to the other southern end of the thing. So this is care economy. But on the other hand, the COVID showed that the care economy has also a subaltern side to it. And who are the informal caregivers? Who are the informal care workers? Where does the boundary between care and other forms of servicing efface itself? Now, care becomes a virtue. And if you speak of urban virtue, the modern city, Kolkata in particular, but I am quite sure Mumbai is also very akin to Kolkata. But if you, again, if you go back to Foucault's the series of lectures on, Foucault actually alludes to the whole question of risk and says that care and risk, they are paired together. The dictionary meaning of care would be something that will surprise us when we speak of care economy. And today I lived through a dictionary and I found that the meaning of it is care means as taking into account of risk, watchful or productive attention, caution, concern, prudence, or regard, usually towards an action or a situation. But look, so care is something which you are taking care of. You are taking care of a risk. You are taking care of a body that is at risk. You are taking care of a life at risk. In a way, you are thinking of a future that is not necessarily good for us, that it has elements of, it may be a bad future, as you call that. There is an element of not public good, but public bad in it. But on the other hand, if you look into the working of the stock market, you will see that future is one of the most flourishing stock market activity, where you trade in futures. That future is not a matter to be feared of. Future is not a matter to be always worried of, but future is a matter which you can play with and which you can make use of. And therefore the stock market, the share market, where the future and classically commodities are the stock of the future market. And on the other hand, if you think of the use of the word care and taking care of our future, you can see that the southern city in a way picks up the meaning of the word or the signification of this word, but then gives it a new turn. The last point that I will say is that these 8 lectures, as I was, thinking through today, I think on one hand, the reason why the urban always propels us to think of the future, and that future, as I said, is a divided future. It is a future that is partitioned. So therefore, it is a field. These 8 lectures are showing, and Muni's lecture brought it out very lively, that on one hand, it's a social space. He brings it out. But the other thing that I would like to add, and therefore I alluded to Chaplin's movie, is also that it's a speculative space. It's a space for speculation, both in the bourgeois sense of the term, as well as in the sensual sense of the word. That urban encourages you to speculate, and to speculate, therefore, on the future. And that gives the city this tinge of being a place of adventure. That means you have your sense of agency, that you know that it's a place where you can carve out your own future, whether collectively or we have, of course, adventurers everywhere. So they do make use of the cities.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ranavidya. We will not have questions, although I'm sure everybody has a lot of comments. You can do that afterwards. I will now request our colleague Poshali to kindly deliver the formal vote of thanks. Poshali has been the one who has been working consistently and entirely on this series of lectures. Yes. As well as on the online course. So, Poshali, thank you before you thank us.
Thanks to all of you today who actually had a lot of patience, and it really took a lot of time, and a lot of technological interruptions happened, but we could finally actually show the projection, actually show the pictures, which I was very anxious that we would miss. And this kind of topic and this kind of research work, of course, cannot go without the visual presentation, and especially pictures from the archives. So I'm happy that we could all actually see, and though with this amount of interruption and delay of time. Thanks to all of you that you could make time and gather here, and we were also very skeptical that how many people will arrive on a Saturday evening, but we are all here. Thanks to our speaker, Dr. Kaustubh Sengupta, who could make it and who could actually gave us a very, very amazing and interesting lecture on the making of Calcutta in the past, in the 19th century, and maybe the discussion on how the colonial city making actually continued, maybe in post-colonial times, in very similar pattern, though in a different administrative form. Maybe we can indulge in those discussions in our days forward. Thanks very much, Shamata Di. Thanks very much for conducting this entire session and being the Shutrodhar in the different parts. Thank you, sir. Thanks to you for being here for such a wonderful sum up of the lecture series, and of course mainly concentrating on the parts which probably we have also missed in designing this lecture series, where as you say that maybe another 1 or 2 lectures if it can be organized, and if it can concentrate on the concept of the southern city making and what it means to actually see and look at the southern city as we live it today, and as it is evolving in our times. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to my colleagues who have been very helpful and who have been very resourceful, and with their support only one could have actually organized all these lectures. This is the 8th and the final lecture, and I really thank Shamarishda, Rajodda, Devoshri and Shubhasridi for all the support that they had lent me. Thanks to all of you.
And thank you, Poshali, once again. Also, very, very crucial information. There is some refreshment. There are some refreshments downstairs. Kindly partake of them before you leave. And we must also thank our partners, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, for enabling us to hold this series of lectures. Thank you, and have a great evening.